It's the epitome of a wolf in sheep's clothing. I mean, we would have to sit here for 6 hours for me to go through everything, honestly. The most insidious thing that he did and that people like him do is they completely fracture your sense of self.
This video focuses on all the tough questions that Evan Rachel Wood should have been asked but wasn't asked in her interview with The View. Questions that any serious journalist, investigator, or prosecutor would ask someone who's made damaging allegations. I'll look at her statements through the eyes of a prosecutor. Marilyn Manson's real name is Brian Hugh Warner. I'll refer to him as Warner. This channel is all about analyzing different types of interviews and conversations. If you're excited about language, you come to the right place. If you like this kind of video, subscribe to the channel and click the like button.
So I'm curious, what drew you to him in the first place? And tell us how the grooming worked.
Well, in the first place, I was not drawn to him. He was drawn to me.
I see.
He approached me under the guise of work, false promises, and that is part of the grooming process. He was grooming me the second he said hello.
First of all, it's sensitive to Wood to deny all accountability, making Warner the active grammatical subject in the sentence, that he was the one who was drawn to her and approached her. This is a pattern. False promises is a broad and unspecific term which could be said about many situations in life. It's not specific to the dramatic verb.
Grooming. He was grooming me the second he said hello.
Is a hyperbole, and she shows awareness of this because in the following she continues with the hypotactic conjunction because, which initiates causality. Obviously, it's sensitive to her to explain the hyperbole.
Because grooming is when you present a false persona to somebody and you tell them lies to lure them into a false sense of security so that they become vulnerable around you. They start opening up, they start giving up their secrets and vulnerabilities. And so you're mining information. Yeah. It's the epitome of a wolf in sheep's clothing. And once they have the information, once they know that you feel safe, they know that the manipulation can start. And so that's part of the grooming process.
In this passage, she doesn't say that Warner presented a false persona to her. She speaks generally, using the impersonal pronoun you, not I, me, or he. This makes her vulnerable to weak definitions, and the prosecutor would indeed find problems with her definitions. The most obvious problem is that she was 18 years old, and as such, responsible for her own choices. The second problem is that her definition could apply to many situations in life, which doesn't automatically imply illegal activity. It's not a crime for a person to be someone else. Almost all people have had that experience at some point in their lives. She uses the expression wolf in sheep's clothing, which again doesn't prove illegal activity, and she uses the word manipulation without giving definitions. Manipulations is most times subjective, and it isn't a crime in itself. The fact that the hosts don't ask her to define manipulation tells us everything we need to know about this interview, that no hard questions will be asked. Instead, they simply go along with these unspecified words and allegations.
They start using the information against you.
Exactly, and then later on the information comes back, yes.
Yeah.
Also, from a purely physical standpoint, Warner doesn't come across as a sheep, which problematizes the biblical idiom she uses, even if we were to believe her.
What was that other abuse?
I mean, we would have to sit here for 6 hours for me to go through everything, honestly. But ultimately, yes, the acts that he committed against me and a number of other victims are absolutely horrific. But the most insidious thing that he did and that people like him do is they completely fracture your sense of self. He made me forget who I was. And it's taken me years to remember. And it's taken me years to get back to myself and to even understand what had happened to me, because I really thought I was the only one.
She shows sensitivity to this question. She starts with "I mean," followed by a nervous outburst, which signifies a sudden and slight lack of cooperation. She also brings attention to honesty, as she uses the adverb honestly. It should always be noted when subjects break their speech pattern and start using concepts that refer to the truth value of what they're saying. It's noted because it could mean that the opposite's the case, or that they're trying to avoid specificity. Either way, it shows a high level of self-awareness. The interesting thing is that she's this focused on generalizing and associating with other people. This makes what she's saying sound a lot like her statement to the world. She mentions a number of other victims and people like him, which is association and generalization, respectively. With association, subjects hope to create a protagonist-antagonist framework to separate Warner and people like him from the victims, including Wood. This association is also sensitive to her to mention when she says that she thought she was the only one, presupposed that she isn't. Generalizations make the statement less personal and invite the audience to identify themselves with Wood's experiences. She says that the most insidious thing he did was make her forget who she was, which is weakened by her previous statements. Because prior to this excerpt, she accused Warner of doing things intimately. Prosecutors would look at the implications of such an allegation as way more insidious and traumatizing, whereas making someone forget who they are sound a lot less insidious and traumatizing, as it's broader and more unspecific. A person can't be convicted of making someone forget who they are. It's subjective and vague. She says that it's taken her years to remember, which is linguistic self-defense, her way of defending why it's taken her so many years to come forward. The adverb really detracts from her associating claim that she thought she was the only one. And as expected in this kind of emotionally based interview, the phrase, "I thought I was the only one," catches the attention of one of the hosts, even though it's probably scripted. And her following question plays into Wood's agenda with the interview, making a statement to the world.
You often hear from abuse victims, "I thought I was the only one," and then they
Yes,
find out they
very
were
often.
not. That's a very common
It is
refrain.
very common.
Well, the society around this issue is so geared around shame and blame and victim blaming, and that is by design. And even in the way we speak about these things, we're still asking victims the question why they didn't leave, and the fact that we're still asking that question tells me how much work there is to do. It's just because we're programmed to say these things, to ask these questions, but we need to start asking different questions.
Remains the most underreported crime in the country.
It is severely underreported, even more so with men, because there's more shame around this issue in regards to men, and it doesn't just happen to women.
If we're to look at this critically, Wood makes sure to use all the right trigger words. She says shame, which in today's zeitgeist connotes something negative. She doesn't use a word like criticize or reprimand or something similar. Next, she chooses the buzzword victim blaming. Under the guise of speaking as a collective we, she uses this word, victim blaming, to anticipate objections as to why she didn't leave. Wood knows that this is a question that people ask themselves, so she makes sure to make it sound preposterous. The hosts engage in lexical reuse, uncritically parroting Wood's words, and Wood returns the favor. When one of the hosts says it's one of the most underreported crimes, Wood reuses the adjective underreported and dramatizes it with extreme vowel stress on the intensifier severely. She's ecstatic that the hosts are playing along, and it's her cue to start appealing to men, which makes it sound more inclusive, considering the fact that the view's viewers are primarily women. Next, the hosts play into Wood's victim narrative and her grandiose way of translating her story to society at large. However, the most interesting thing is that Wood answers in general terms. She says you, not I, when asked a specific question relating to her situation.
And Evan, I just first want to thank you for sharing your story. Thank you. Grateful to you for your legislative actions that you've done as well. I have to ask you, and I know this is probably hard to talk about, but your bravery is just so inspiring. How did you come back from that? And how did you come back ready to inspire others and to fight this battle and take it on?
When somebody aids in the destruction of yourself and you forget who you are, you feel pretty broken and pretty empty.
Pronouns are intuitive. They're one of the first things we learn. What's yours, what's mine, and so on. It speaks volumes that she doesn't consistently use the personal pronoun I. She looks down, prolongs the words, and makes micropauses. These hesitation markers indicate that Wood has a hard time answering the specific question, and not because she recalls bad memories.
I always cite it as the worst thing that ever happened to me, because it was when the phoenix rose from the ashes. That was the beginning.
Thinking of herself as the phoenix that rose from the ashes plays into the bravery frame that the host created, or tried to create. This is self-praise, which is often frowned upon in court. It's hard to feel pity for someone who's this aware of sounding like a victim, who has this kind of self-image. It makes them sound calculating and thus deceptive. Wood continues her appeals to pity, pathos, in a barely concealed attempt to get the audience to identify themselves with her.
Because imagine, somebody says something that hurts your feelings, something bad. It sticks with you, for the rest of your life. Now imagine that 24/7 every day for 4 years. What that does to your brain and to your psyche and your self-esteem, and how long it would take to undo the psychological warfare that has been done, which a lot of victims will tell you is the worst part of the abuse. It's not the physical, it's what they do to your mind, body, and spirit.
In this interview, she hasn't specified what she's actually experienced psychologically, what's been going on 24/7 for 4 years, as she hyperbolically claims. By definition, hyperboles are exaggerations used for dramatic effect, and they take away from the reliability of the point she's making. She isn't narrating, she's persuading, and she uses forceful body language and passive-aggressive smiles to do so. Notice how she doesn't include herself in the number of victims. She says, which a lot of victims will tell you, making the victims the grammatical subject. This is very telling. Next, she uses the impersonal pronoun you when she makes an excuse as to why she hasn't talked about this before. This is another way in which she not only evades responsibility, but also tries to persuade the audience.
And, those first few years, you're doing what everybody tells you to do, which is try to move on and forget it ever happened. Right. You're running. You are running. And then it catches up with you and you realize, I can't run from this anymore.
Persuasion is a bad strategy when you're the one who's made serious allegations, as you shouldn't draw conclusions for other people. Judges and juries think of persuasion as a condescending way of trying to get them to change how they think.
And abusers know this. And they know there's a statute of limitations, and they know all they got to do is scare you long enough until that statute of limitations runs out. In fact, Brian did an interview in 2012 where he specifically cited the statute of limitations.
Here, she makes a subjective connection that because Warner mentioned the statute of limitations in an interview, this is because he knew that he should just scare her long enough. But this is the very thing that she should be attempting to prove, that he tried to scare her by mentioning the statute of limitations. She doesn't, as she doesn't provide context. Thus, this is circular reasoning, which ends up begging the question. Wood continues giving advice to the audience, even though her allegations are yet to be tested in court. Sounding like a spokesperson comes naturally to Wood.
And the best advice I could give is to not shame them. Don't come at them panicked. Don't say, you have to do this, you got to do that. Just be that lifeline. Let them know that there is a hand there ready to grab their hand when they're ready, because they will tell you when it's safe. They will tell you when it's time.
Next, a host reads Warner's reaction to the allegations.
Saying, quote, nothing that Evan Rachel Wood, Ilma Gore, or their hand-picked co-conspirators have said on this matter can be trusted. This is just more of the same from a group who have spread falsehood after falsehood, end quote.
And Wood reacts by associating with other survivors, which is the trigger word she chooses.
I am not scared. I am sad, because this is how it works. This is what pretty much every survivor that it tries to expose someone in a position of power goes through.
Notice how she tries to dismiss this personal criticism by making a generalization that this is something every survivor goes through. Dismissing a criticism by appealing to an alleged common experience is a logical fallacy, as it fails to properly deal with the specific criticism. Hence, Wood's self-defense is weak.
And this is part of the retaliation that keeps survivors quiet. This is why people don't want to come forward, because this was expected.
Wood fails to see, or doesn't want to see, that anyone would react to the damaging allegation she's made, especially if the accused is in fact innocent. She can't simply look at this reaction from a victim's perspective, simply make it about retaliation. And in any civilized society, all people, no matter what we think about them, are innocent until proven guilty. It's obvious that she would get a reaction, but she doesn't call it a reaction. She calls it retaliation, which, given the context, sounds like a hyperbolic noun that's a bit too self-serving.
I'm very confident that I have the truth on my side and that the truth will come out.
She doesn't simply say that she's confident that she has the truth on her side. She looks down and she places emphasis on the moderation very, which ironically makes her sound less confident or maybe even insecure. Next, Wood makes sure to sound self-effacing and sound like she's doing this for other people. This is almost identical to Amber Heard's speech pattern.
So yes, again, I'm not doing this to clear my name. I'm doing this to protect people. But again, like I have a platform. I'm privileged. I'm white. I have resources, you know, and like I can't even imagine how alone people must feel that go through this, that do not have privilege, that do not have a platform, that do not have money, and they're alone. They're so alone, and so or they feel like they are.
I was able to turn the things that I've lived through, my pain, my life experiences, into work, into action, into providing a voice for other people. But I selfishly found relief in being able to use what I've lived through to advocate for others, to bring light to these issues, to give a voice to people who don't have the voice and the platform that I have.
Like Heard, Wood engages in humble brag, which is when a person uses a seemingly self-critical statement that's actually meant to draw attention to said person's impressive qualities. The seemingly self-critical statement is Wood mentioning all the privilege she has in order to make her sound more generous by including other, less fortunate people in her speech. This was my way of looking at Wood's narrative through the eyes of a prosecutor. I hope you found it interesting. If you did, click the like button and subscribe for more videos. This helps the channel very much. See you in the next video.
I want to ask you one question because I think it's important. When someone begins to isolate you from your family, is that something a family member should keep really close attention to? Because one of the things that you talk about is being isolated from your folks. So is this important for people who are outside to keep an eye on?